Welcome to Bite-Sized Stories. Today, we meet Frances. Frances loved a good horror story. Her favorite thing in the world was to curl up in bed, her layers and layers of coverlets scrunched tightly around her, and her sweatshirt hood pulled up over her head, and devour stories of murderous fiends. This secret pleasure was best undertaken at night, of course, but occasionally, on a dark Saturday in the winter, she would find herself crawling into bed in the early afternoon to dive into her fiction while the sun was setting low in the sky, while the light was going flat and harsh, and as the shadows lengthened outside of her window. While she was reading, she would pull the hood of her sweatshirt close in around her face, like a cocoon, and twist the laces in and out, releasing them only when required to change the page. And even then, she would drop only one, the second one still clutched tightly in her other hand. Her husband hated this habit. He was equal parts mystified and annoyed, as he preferred reading nonfiction, history mostly, and he generally preferred reading in the daylight. Like normal people do, he would say to her. Perhaps if you didn't read in the dark before bed, you wouldn't have to bundle yourself up so tightly to avoid being scared, he would say. But Frances wasn't convinced. She loved the rush of adrenaline that each story would bring. Little tidbits of macabre information dripping out page after page, building to a terrifying climax before winding back down. And she loved to pull her hoodie tighter and tighter as the story progressed. In the rest of her life, Frances was a stout woman in her early 40s who moved slowly and deliberately through the world. She wore mostly black and eschewed all adornment, preferring to blend into the background rather than to draw attention. To those around her, she seemed overly careful, and had they known about her penchant for horror, they might have assumed that she had been scared into this behavior. But in her mind, the opposite was true. She had always been languid, had always struggled to muster enthusiasm and energy. She felt that her heart beat at half the pace of other people's, that her steps were always half a length shorter. At work, she had leaned into this trait by choosing a profession that required calm, steady behavior. Against the advice of everyone around her, she had become a jeweler. Lately, though, she felt as though her life were passing her by. Slowly passing her by, one moment at a time. A drip, drip, drip of moments that were indistinguishable from one another. As a result, she had started to consider a daring idea. The insight had come to her the prior weekend while engrossed in her latest story. The novel she had picked was the third in a series, featuring gruesome details of a serial killer's exploits in the filthy back alleys of New York. The killer always exited via the rickety old fire escapes, which Frances considered a nice touch. But that wasn't what really caught her attention. What had caught her attention was the unusual career of the main character, a 911 dispatcher. "I could do that," thought Frances excitedly, her heart picking up its pace. I could really do that. But not just anywhere, she thought. There wouldn't be enough action for her in the rural, laid-back area she lived in now. But a city, she mused. A big city would be perfect. Her husband was not amused or interested in this idea. His life was fine, he told her. He enjoyed their solitude and space. But Frances persisted. There will be museums, she entreated, and architecture, and monuments, and historical sites. He could even pick the city. And so eventually, he relented to an experimental trial. 6 months in a big city where he could explore during the day and sleep during the nights when Frances was on duty. He chose Boston, because why wouldn't you? And they began to make plans. Frances was elated. She began to move more rapidly through her days, the lure of her new adventure pulling her forward. Her heartbeat increased. Color began to rise in her cheeks. She threw off the coverlets during the night, and for the first time in her life, she felt alive.